So it's time for my sowing and growing video for March. In fact, this is just a sneak peek of that I do at the end of January, just to give people sort of advance notice of what I'm going to do. And this is the second time I've recorded this because my phone crashed on me about halfway through, so I'm not very happy about that. I am looking at my iPad, which shows the database, and there's a link to that database down in the description. But I'll also I'll record the screen now and I'll put it up on the side of the screen so you can kind of follow along and see all the details of all the different varieties and things like that I'm going to sow. So I'll start off with some parsnips. It's a bit early for parsnips, but if you chit them like I chit my peppers, so basically like that, where I've just got a bit of kitchen roll, I just lay the seeds on the kitchen roll and dampen it and then put a lid on and just put it in a warmish spot, not particularly warm, just about 18 degrees, something like that will be fine. And yeah, within a few weeks, not in a few weeks, but a week's time, you'll see the first sort of signs of a little tiny root, and that's the time to get them planted. So I plant mine in one of my spinach beds, and what I do is I harvest every other spinach plant, and then in the place where the spinach plant was, I just make a little hole, drop a couple of these pre-chitted parsnip seeds into the hole and cover it over. And because they're under cold frame, so they're nice and warm, it's just a polythene top basically, so it's not that warm, but it's certainly warmer during the day. And so within about 10 days they'll break surface and they'll grow away in between all of these spinach plants, and then I'll harvest the spinach plants progressively through March. And so by April time there should just be parsnips grown. And then what I'll do is, in the gaps between the parsnips left by the spinach plants that I took out, I'll plant onions. I'll either put zebun shallots or red barren onions in, and they will grow without interfering with each other at all, because the onions are shallow rooted, the parsnips are deep rooted, there's loads of space between them, and they basically come ready at roughly the same time. So take the onions out in August and start harvesting the smallish parsnips in August, and harvest them all the way through August and into September. And by then my main crop parsnips are ready. So that's the way I like to do my early parsnips. So I also do some Mikado spinach. I've got loads of spinach in the ground at the moment. Got loads of new little spinach plants coming, which are looking really lovely. And those are the kind of ones we're going to be eating in April. These Mikado are the ones we're going to be eating in May. And got a little patch of land where I've just come free by about March time, and then it'll be empty until June. I put my carrots in, so that's a perfect window of opportunity to get a spinach harvest. Mikado is great because it doesn't bolt quite as quickly in the heat of sort of late spring and early summer. I'll do two batches. I'll do one at the beginning of March, one at the end of March, and I won't do any spinach for cooking leaves until autumn. But I'll do baby leaf for salad. So anyway, then I've got lots of carrots. We have carrots all year round. I'll do basically this batch of carrots that I'm doing in early March is just going to go into containers, probably germinate in the polytunnel. And I'm not going to do very many because carrots grow better the longer you leave them. So I'm only doing 2 tubs every 2 weeks, so I can harvest a tub a week basically. And I germinate them in the polytunnel at this time of year, March, and then I will move them outside onto the top of my IBC tanks, which are right up here, sort of 1 and a bit meters tall. So too high in theory for carrot fly, and I'll leave them up there from April until I harvest them in July time. And I won't start doing carrots in the ground until April. I find that that's kind of perfect because then you can leave once they're in the ground, you can leave them for ages. So you can start them in April and you can still be harvesting them in September and they're fine. They're probably quite big, but there's nothing wrong with big carrots. Whereas in containers, if you left them that long, they'd be rubbish, you know, because it's just too hard to keep the containers watered all the way through summer. Celeriac, just do a few celeriac. Yeah, it's not an important crop for us. Leeks, I've got some leeks actually growing quite nicely. They're the ones that are going to get planted in the polytunnel. I like to just pop a few leeks around in the polytunnel. They grow really well for a summer harvest. These are for an autumn harvest, and I tend to interplant these around the edges of beds. So I particularly like interplanting them around the edges of my Colette beds and my Brussels sprout beds, because you kind of remove the leaves off those as you go through summer. And as you move in the leaves, obviously the leeks have got loads more light and they kind of thrive around those edges. And I'll do my main crop leeks a little bit later on. Start my first tomatoes. So I don't do a lot of early tomatoes, I just do a few. And these, what I really like, are Tumbler, and there's some other variety, I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but it's an alternative to Tumbler. It just comes a little bit earlier. I've got a few of those, I'll try those as well. I probably do, I think I'm going to do something like 10 to 12 hanging baskets in the polytunnel, and only 6 will stay in the polytunnel the whole of their lives. Some of them will just sort of move into the garden and just sort of hang in the garden, because hanging baskets of tomatoes, they just look really nice. And just find that tomatoes in hanging baskets is just the best way really to get early tomatoes, so much better than trying to do sort of early cordon tomatoes or something, which just don't do anywhere near as well. So we're not doing as many potatoes this year as we've done in the past, about half as many actually. So I'm only going to do like a couple of tubs every couple of weeks, and kind of concentrate on a mix of Swift and Estimate and Charlotte. They do of course need to be under cover. Mine will go in the mini greenhouse and the polytunnel, and they'll be covered over with fleece if there's any sort of chance of frost. Generally speaking, I think if there's, temperature says it's going to get down to 3 degrees on the weather forecast, I'll fleece them, because 3 degrees on the weather forecast often translates into a light frost on our allotment. So you'd have to be cautious, because even just a little nip and it really knocks them back, really badly. They will often survive and kind of regrow, but kind of can reduce the size of the crop by maybe 30% in my experience. Keep on doing lettuces, loads of lettuces. I'm generally doing lettuces for harvesting whole heads at the moment. I obviously harvest individual leaves a lot over winter and in autumn, but in summer I just haven't got time really to be harvesting individual leaves off dozens and dozens of lettuces. It's just so much easier just to cut a head off and harvest the whole thing. Not quite as productive in terms of the land, but it's a lot more efficient for me. Saves my knees and my back as well. So next up, another batch of carrots, another batch of big baking potato types, and then we get to the middle of March, and the middle of March is when I really like to do most of my brassicas. So I've done sort of early brassicas, like these early kale plants, for example, because I like a nice continuous supply of kale. And I've done early Brussels sprouts as well, because I really love Brussels sprouts, and I love to harvest the leaves all the way through through spring and into summer, and then I get a lovely harvest of actual Brussels sprouts and sprout tops in July and early August. But the vast majority of my brassicas I will do the middle of March. I'm not a fan really of trying to do main crop anything early. I like to be reasonably conservative with my main crops, because I don't want anything to go wrong. I want to maximise harvest. I like to do small quantities of early crops and big quantities of main crops, nice and cautious. So Calabrese, I'll do Brussels sprouts. I'm mainly doing breast. I might do crispus as well, but at the moment I've got breast seeds, and they grew really well for me last year, so I'm just going to stick with those, as I say, for most of them. I've got a few red cabbages in, got about a dozen red cabbages in the ground at the moment, but for my main crop, red cabbages, I'll start them again, say sort of mid-March time. I'm going to do red drumhead and I'm going to do red fugo. I find red fugo does quite really nicely for me. It's an F1 variety. It's a little bit bigger than red drumhead, but the seeds are really expensive by comparison. So I have loads of red drumhead seeds, so I tend to just mix them a little bit, just so I don't have to spend too much money. And graffiti cauliflowers, I've got some graffiti cauliflowers down here for my early crop, but my kind of main crop of graffiti I will do in mid-March, and I probably will do another batch, but I won't do really very many cauliflowers over summer. We don't do a huge number of cauliflowers. We certainly don't try and be kind of self-sufficient in cauliflowers. It's one of the few things that we're prepared to buy from the shops. I do my first courgettes, so they will go in the polytunnel, and I just do like to do a few in mid-March to start harvesting in mid to late May, because that's kind of the time when we're running out of our stored squash and we like a kind of continuous availability of squash. We'll have a bit in the freezer as well if there's a problem. I'll do my main crop, kale, so the stuff that I just showed you just down here. That's the stuff that we'll be eating in May and June, and then this stuff from March we'll be eating in July all the way through. We're still eating it now, but I will do some late kale as well, because the late kale it's just so much nicer quality really than stuff that you start back in March. So late kale sort of in August sort of time gives a really beautiful harvest in sort of early spring, and then it's all gone to seed by May. Colettes, hugely important crop for me, colettes. It's kind of the mainstay of my brassica diet all the way through winter. And then if you leave, like 20 of the colettes on, as you kind of get into early spring, then they just produce beautiful flowers and loads of beautiful fresh new leaves. And so it's always worth leaving a few, because you could harvest just a few little tiny colettes that are kind of left on your plant, or you could wait and harvest this massive leaves. And it's the same with Brussels sprouts as well. You leave a few manky old Brussels sprouts on your plants and you get this beautiful, like loads and loads of beautiful little leaves in spring. So leeks, this is my main crop, sowing of leeks, 16th of March. And so they'll be ready for planting out in a couple of months after that. There's a much less chance of them going to seed, I find, if you can start them, as I say, sort of middle of March to plant out in sort of late spring, when there's no chance of frost or anything like that, but it's still not that hot, so the stress levels on the plants is still fairly low, and the combination of no sort of chance of frost and no sort of stress of the summer heat just means that the plants tend to thrive better than any other dates, although I'm not a big believer in the idea that there's kind of a perfect date for anything. Also sort of mid-March, that's when I tend to plant out my perennial kale cuttings. And I've got a few plants, perennial kale plant Tortandine, that really suffered in that -10 degrees centigrade big freeze. And whilst they might recover, I think it's just better to take those out and put new cuttings in. I've also got some seeds, perennial kale Tortandine seeds, which I got from my plants because they did flower last year, which is pretty unusual, but it does happen. So I'll be sowing some of those seeds as well and see how they go. And what else I've got down here? Just keep on doing radishes, just a tray every couple of weeks. I like doing cherry bell now. I've tried so many different radishes, but cherry bell just seems to be the best. They just stand in the ground really nicely. Keep on doing potatoes. And then I'm starting some trials of these Salanova lettuces. So I've done Salanovas in the past, just 1 or 2 varieties. I really like them. And again, they're just perfect for harvesting whole heads. And as I said, I'm sort of moving away from harvesting individual leaves, just because we harvest so much salad. It's a lot of work harvesting individual leaves, by comparison with just snipping off a head. And so, yeah, so these are the varieties of Salanovas that I'm trying, and they just look absolutely beautiful. And obviously I'm doing a lot of these in the kitchen garden, and so I think they're more beautiful than flowers, to be honest. They're really gorgeous. And then I'll do my main crop, parsnips, about sort of 22nd of March. I might do some early April as well. And I interplant those parsnips generally with onion sets. And yeah, I really like doing that interplant. As I mentioned before, I'm doing an interplant at the beginning of March, but every time I do parsnips, I always interplant with onions. They're just the perfect combination. They don't interfere with each other at all in terms of the yield, and harvesting them's really simple as well. And the onion sets that I'm going to do this year are Carmen heat treated, and I'll start those in trays towards the end of March. So about the early April sort of time, they will be sort of this sort of size, by the middle of April probably, and then I'll probably get those planted out. And then at the end of March, I will start my cordon tomatoes. But most of my cordon tomatoes this year, I'm going to buy grafted plants. I've tried grafting them myself and not had a lot of success, to be honest with you. In fact, I never have managed yet to get one planted to the point in which it's actually giving me a harvest. I've grown a few, but they've never done very well. Whereas the grafted plants that I've bought on the main, I've had some bad experiences, but on the main have been really great and have given me at least a third more in terms of harvest. And because I'm growing in the polytunnel, in ground that's had tomatoes in for many years, I kind of find that grafted plants are just better. They're just more resilient to disease and things like that, and are just really deep rooted. And that deep root really matters when you're growing in a polytunnel where water is kind of at a premium. But I will do a few spares just in case any of these grafted plants that I'm buying fail. And so I'll do just a couple of honeycomb and a couple of San Marzano, but the grafted ones that I'm buying are Aviditas, which is a beautiful like little cherry plum. It's my favourite of all the tomatoes that I've grown. And honeycomb, which is another really sweet little cherry tomato. And as I say, I'll do loads of tumbler tomatoes in hanging baskets earlier than this, and I'll also do some for growing outside in big tubs later than this. So that's my selection of tomatoes. Pretty boring, to be honest. I'm not a huge tomato buff. I like tomatoes, but you know, this selection is fine for me. So then just this last batch of Mikado spinach. As I say, anything late, you know, this sort of time, which is going to be harvested in June, much better to do something like Mikado than it is any of the true spinaches, which will almost certainly bolt before you've had much of a harvest off them. And then I'll do my main crop, celery, and I'll plant out my oca. I'm not doing much oca this year after last year's experience of oca, where I lost almost the whole crop to the frost. But more important than that is I'm just not doing containers on the allotment, smallish containers anyway, like 35 litre pots and below. I'm not doing any of those sorts of containers on the allotment this year, just because I'm trying really hard to reduce the amount of water that I use and the amount of time I spend watering. So I've got some really big containers, you know, maybe like 100 litres or above, and they tend to be okay. Just because the size of them, it's easier to give them a really good water once a week, and that means you can go on holiday and all of that sort of thing. But smaller containers, I'm just not going to do. So I'm just going to do 2 little locker plants, and that's it this year. Sugar snap peas. So I've already got peas in the ground, which are growing beautifully. They're mange too. So then I've got some more peas which will go outside. And this is as late as I will do peas because we eat them all fresh. So we want them to be finished before there is a risk of pea moth. And some parsley and some more salad onions. So we're always doing salad onions. And this time, by the end of March, I'm not doing any salad onions that will bulb, because I really like doing things like North Holland Blood Red and Leela, which are bulbing onions, beautiful purple red bulbing onions, but I don't really like doing bulbing onions for harvesting as bunching onions, as salad onions, later on in March, because I find that by then they're just trying to bulb rather than doing the greens. And I like my salad onions kind of pencil thin. So I switch over to just Guardsman and then some of the varieties later on, which I'll talk about in later videos. So that's it. That is what I'm doing. And if you want all the kind of details, not that this video is, lacking in detail, but yeah, if you want the details, then I highly recommend that you, let me just stop this actually. Yeah, that you take a look in the reference information section of my ebook, where you'll find data on everything that I've done this year and last year and the year before, and there's details in there of what I actually sowed in previous years, when I actually planted it, when I actually harvested it. There's harvest videos so you can see the actual quality of the harvests. There's seedling progress videos so that you can see the actual progress of the seedlings that I sowed and when I sowed them and all of that sort of thing. And yeah, just loads of details basically so that you can kind of compare your results with my results. You can look at what you can expect if you follow my gardening dates and system and things like that. And yeah, you can comment about things that you do that are better than me as well and help me learn. So highly recommend that. And also there's a nice section in the ebook on individual growing guides, which has got all the things that I sow pretty much, and detailed guides on all the hints and tips and tricks and dates and fertilizing and watering and all that, and harvesting and interplanting and successional plantings and all of those sorts of things for all the things that I grow. So check out the individual growing guides. And if you want the kind of big picture, then in the book as well, there's big sections on advanced growing techniques and self-sufficiency and planning and all of those sorts of things. And if you're new to gardening, you just want the basics, you want to know how to sow and how to plant and how to harvest and how to make cold frames and low tunnels and all those sorts of things, then check out the basics section of the ebook. So all of those things are linked down below in the description. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.